Welcome to the Crude Awakening, Peak Oil, and the End of Cheap Energy. My name is Tim Hudson. That's John Richter and Dominic Crea. We're part of a group we call the Institute of Sustainable Energy Education, and we're just a small group of concerned scientists that are interested in participating in this conversation about energy and our civilization. Okay? We're going to do this series in two parts. Part one is going to be called The Alarm. First thing I'm going to do is something new where I'm actually going to step up at a higher level and just look at the peak oil concept in context. We'll look at whether peak oil has made the mainstream, what kind of messages are you hearing about peak oil, and then we'll give you a couple quick observations or distinctions that may give particularly people that are just hearing this for the first time a framework to listen, to hear and understand what people like us are saying or other people who are talking about peak oil. And then we're going to do something we stole from one of the great visionaries of this whole peak oil concept, Matt Simmons, and he coined the term, let's do a Dickens walk through energy. I'll look at basically the United States as a model, a place that already has reached peak, what happened, see if we can look at what are the implications for the world if we apply some of the lessons we learned here to the world, and we're actually going to try to do some dates on this concept of when we would peak. We kind of do a different variation on it because we're not predictors. Then I'm going to segue to what we call impact or the transition. In other words, we're convinced that we're going to ultimately usher out the era of fossil fuels and usher in a sustainable future for energy. What we're concerned about is not that it will occur. It's going to occur. It's what this transition is going to look like. And what I think we find is many people are missing is this transition is critical for several reasons, but one of which is we're going to be alive. Out of all the millions of years and all the time man will be on the planet, we will be the ones that get to experience fully, or our children, this transition, and it may be a little bit different than even the hopeful message of where we're going to end, which will be nice in 100 years, maybe. But it's the transition. So we're going to talk about that and ask is, are we sleepwalking to disaster? I'll read a couple of transitional quotes. John, who's known as the Energy Prophet, also this team is known as the Energy Myth Busters, will come up and talk about impact by going right at the jugular. He's going to take a look at how high this price can go. And we've seen some price movements. You ain't seen nothing yet. People are complaining about nothing. Wait till you see what the numbers may hold. And this is not strange stuff. John's got an economics background. This is grounded in science as well. Then he's going to look at what are the supply side reactions if, in fact, the peak oil foundation I lay is true. It may not be. We're just proposing a possibility here. What's going to happen when we say, well, we've got to come up with all these substitutes, some alternatives. We got to get the tar sands or the shale oil, we've got nuclear coal and renewables and all these things. What are these reactions and how real are they? And if you have a precious reaction, just be strong and challenge us, because the message is not necessarily good on the supply side. John actually thinks the demand side reactions are probably more important, which is what are all the ways, if the supply side fails to deal with this reality, we're going to have to change our lifestyles, or what's it just going to cause to our civilization as a whole. And then he's going to really say, do we have enough time for a transition, for a smooth transition? Really, we certainly have enough time. It's do we have enough time for, probably the assumption is a gentle transition? And how bumpy will that ride be? Now, normally I don't even define peak oil, and we don't do this overview of what's happened, but because we've been doing this for so long, we thought, let's look kind of like the State of the Union of peak oil. And John said, you must define it then, so somebody just hearing it knows what you're talking about. So first of all, how many people here know what peak oil means when they hear it? Good, yeah, I figured if you're coming here you know, but some people come here to know. I sat for years listening to John speak about it, not understanding what the heck he was really talking about. It took me a long time to really digest it. But fundamentally, it's simply the point where the rate of oil extraction begins to permanently decline. And what makes that important is we suddenly get a switch from an oil's buyer's market to a seller's market. And we have these sudden increases in prices. Remember, this thing's called the end of cheap energy, not the end of energy. there'll be never an end of energy. Okay, so first of all, has peak oil hit mainstream? One of the ways you look is you go out to the print media and say, are there books written on it? Have it shown up in magazines? I remember when there were, like, the parties over and Richard Heinberg was out there speaking about energy. It was kind of not that many books about it and some really esoteric ones. There were people talking about it, but by golly, I just went and said, I'm going to just do a couple creams. I found so many books. John's read them all. I've not read them all. John reads all these books, and I said, give me the Cliff Notes version. Also, we've seen magazines like National Geographic, for crying out loud, has headlines, and Rolling Stone had a great article, Rolling Stone, called The Long Emergency, which was a phenomenal article on James Kunstler's view of peak energy. So it's made the mainstream print media. How about film? Sure enough, Syriana, you know, it started getting at. There's something going on in the Middle East. There's a situation that Hollywood's throwing some money, figuring, hey, they don't do something if they don't think there's a mainstream audience for the topic. CNN did. Who saw this? We were warned. Wait a minute. Okay, that's interesting. CNN massively advertised in a topic called We Were Warned Tomorrow's Oil Prices, and it dealt with what happens. What happens if suddenly we have this oil situation? And then many documentaries have been out there. This is just a few that really, the documentary people have really gone out and done this topic well in film media. But probably what surprised me most is the oil companies are doing it. I mean, my gosh, there's not denial from them. Their advertisement for Chevron of the Will You Join Us campaign says energy will be one of the defining issues of this century, and one thing is clear, the era of easy oil is over. So I went and I thought, I'm going to just show a screenshot of the website so people know, look, here's what the oil companies are saying. That's one of the messages you're hearing about peak oil coming from them. What they have is a counter, an actual counter, so that while you're on the website, the number of barrels of oil that are being used worldwide is clicking away. For the 60 seconds it took me, or a little over a minute, to make a screenshot, capture pace, almost 50,000, 60,000 barrels of oil were used. So I'm thinking roughly, John, 1,000 barrels a second. I don't even need anybody, no scientists. Go to the Chevron website, spend a minute, see how many barrels were there, and it gave me suddenly, I said, okay, I can feel that. 1,000 barrels down is like, how many swimming pools?
I think we figured, was it 10 swimming pools?
A second, just with full of oil going poof, poof. So as we're speaking, just kind of imagine just these swimming pools full of oil just going up. We're trying to get, how do we feel for these big numbers? Can we get a sense of it?
What's worldwide?
Worldwide.
How many barrels a second?
1,000 barrels is what Chevron's website told me on my simple little touch and copy test. So the peak oil conversation appears to have gone mainstream. It wasn't mainstream. John and I debated. I said, John, I think I'm going to declare that this conversation's out there. My family members are talking about something. A conversation. We're not sure it's the one or it's correct, but there is one. But we think there are many messages being delivered by people speaking on it, including us, and people need to begin to understand that vantage point. So you can start critically listening to it, because it's going to get talked about. Politicians are going to use it. We better understand what their agenda is and what they're saying. Some are predicting doom and gloom. We used to actually just really get up and predict doom and gloom, but I thought, well guys, everybody's doom and gloomer. We better start looking at, is that doing the proper job? Does there need to be any clarification about that? So we're talking about this message where they're saying peak oil will be like the 1970s oil crisis, but this time it is here to stay. The world, and the Hirsch report from the Department of Energy said, the world has never confronted a problem like this. Commercial airlines are going to go bankrupt. Tourism, bankrupt. The Great Depression begins. Crop yields halve without oil-based fertilizers and pesticides. Are you prepared for the end of cheap oil? This is a poster now that theoretically kids would be hanging up in their bedroom instead of Britney Spears or whatnot. This is a sign of definite mainstream message, and that is definitely a doom message. But not everyone has that doom message. There's a group on the blogosphere who uses the internet for their information. Many of us do, the mainstream media, and they're saying peak oil debunked. Debunking peak oil hype with facts and figures and exposing the agendas behind peak oil. I said, these guys I've got to talk to and study. They're smart people. They really aren't saying in denial like just a bunch of idiots. They're saying, how come all you alarmists and hypers and doomers are predicting stuff that never comes true? How come you're so wrong and I want to hold you accountable? And they're right. People have been wrong about year 2000. It's just been wrong about this. And here we're speaking again. And so he kind of addresses that. There are others that say, there's a bottomless well. We will never run out of energy. This particular gentleman has a way of saying it that John and I found very interesting. He says, basically, human demand for energy is insatiable. We will never stop craving more, nor should we ever wish to. Life is energy in increasing pursuit of order and a tireless battle against the forces of dispersion and decay. So we need energy to kind of organize things in a civilization. But then he says this, which kind of is interesting angle. Slower trips, dimmer bulbs, smaller refrigerators, and such, they aren't more efficient. They're slower, smaller, and darker. It is more sedentary, calm and quiet. In short, it's lethargic. He's actually saying you alarmists are trying to turn a culture of active, enterprising people to a lethargic group of civilized sloths. I thought, that's an interesting angle. And then we've heard, well, whatever happened to hydrogen? I remember hydrogen was supposed to save us. That seems to have vanished. It's like, what's going on there? We will talk about this. And isn't the latest message from the White House that it's all about ethanol? But isn't that same guy that talked about hydrogen? So how do we position that message? And what does it mean? This one got me. When John said, Tim, did you know the environmentalists are supporting nuclear? I said, no, get out of here. Hell no, we won't blow. Come on. What are you talking about? No chance. Yes. But why? What's the message? And they're using peak oil. You got to listen and understand. And we'll cover that. And then there's this other concept of clean coal. No, seriously. I remember I spent a time on a bus. The clean coal movement is big. Do not underestimate coal and nuclear. You're going to get that message. Do not underestimate it at a renewable energy conference. And then will someone tell us whether or not alternatives or renewable energy will save us? Let me read the quote. Everybody know Mike Ruger from the Wilderness. He's definitely far left, environmentalist, passionate advocate, big followers. And he said, perhaps the greatest flaw in the peak oil movement's current operating paradigm is that a part of the movement, at least, instead of building lifeboats in the face of an immediate disaster, is delusionally focused on trying to build alternative powered luxury liners that operate just like the current paradigm that we as a species need to be abandoning. And I said, John, am I hearing this right? That because I do this, whatever you could do wrong or think about the peak oil movement, I do first, down and down, correct me. And I said, well, let's just do that, blah, blah. And he said, what you're doing, Tim, is you want to keep your lifestyle, this mobile lifestyle that was based on this cheap, beautiful substance called oil that had high energy content, and it was a rich stuff we had in the earth for us, and just replace it and not change anything else. And he said, perhaps this is a delusion that there's something more at hand here. I call it, this is the information explosion of information meets peak oil, and what people are doing is their eyes are glazing over. Mine do. I've got friends and scientists that we sit around and, because we don't make any money on this, this is our hobby. We realize, what, you're nuts, this is our hobby. Because it's our hobby, we talk about it. I met John, he was 13 years old, he moved into our neighborhood. I'm going, I gotta go play with this guy, this is cool, I got his friend. And what's the guy doing? He's building a catapult and reading a book called The Energy Primer. And I said, what? 13 years old. I said, John, that looks like the world's most boring book. I remember the image because it had a colorful sun or something. I said, and it took him a long time to get to me at all about what was going on. So this brain, this guy, believe me, you can ask any question, he will pull it up. We just got to make sure we have time. So the question is, what is worth knowing? Here's what we think. Maybe, because we are in the midst of an unprecedented information explosion, we're taking this from the Forward to the Phoenix Project, printed a long time ago, that the most important question to ask is, what is worth knowing? This question underscores the necessity of sifting through the sea of data to extract the significant insights. There is not enough time to know everything, sorry John. He wants to, he can't even himself. Which now means that one of the most important functions is to prioritize information. It's overwhelming. You must be a scientist, an economic, a social guy, an environmentalist. You've got to know so much to figure out, what do I do? What does society do? What does my city do? You can't do it anymore because you're up against too much information. How do we figure this thing out? Because wrong conclusions, I usually don't say to me, just ignore it, may not be good, or too much thinking, well, I'll just separate myself from society and just go do that may mean nobody hears from you anymore because you unplugged your computer, maybe smartly. So it's like, it's not clear what should you do. So let me do 3 quick observations and then I'm going to dive into energy so we can set the stage for the energy prophet. And I'll show you a nice picture of what he really looks like. That's not, he really looks like the Grim Reaper. We think the peak oil coin has 3 sides. And I actually got this from a beginner's energy workshop. And I said, this helps me. There's the one side of the coin, the energy that you're talking about, whether it be coal, nuclear, solar, whatever. But on the other side, you can't think of that alone, because if you do, and you miss the environment, you miss a piece of the puzzle. You got to kind of weigh those two. But there's another side to a coin, that little skinny side of the coin, that I see most people forget, the economics. And I see people get confused about, well, why is coal and nuclear? I don't understand. Aren't they idiots? What? No, there's something about the economics that's driving stuff. So when you look and listen to people, think about the energy and the environment, but also the economics together, and you'll see everybody positions themselves kind of in this 3-dimensional weighting, their value system about what's important between all those things, and then they say, now I will give you a message based on that value system. Here's what you should do, and you go, I'll do it, and it doesn't fit me, or it doesn't make sense, or you call them liars. No, it's a different weighting of different values. We think you got to put all 3 together, and when you listen to us, think of all 3. Understand where we're coming from. Understand when John says, I don't think ethanol is going to make it. Why? Why not? What's the economics, or is that an environmental issue? The second observation that I think I've noticed appears to be missing is we probably need to better understand the relationship between our financial system, our civilization itself, that a financial system was constructed under, and cheap energy and this assumption that we must grow financially every year because we're debtors. And banks do not like not to be paid back. And the only way you pay back mortgages is you grow an economy, right? Recessions are evil, who says? Slowing down is evil. Why? Why is this? You know, we have a problem, they say you must buy more to get America out of the problem. Because if you don't, something bad happens because this engine kind of goes out of start. It's like a primed engine. It's hard to get it started, so you got to keep it running and running at a certain clip. The global financial system is entirely dependent on constantly increasing supplies of oil and natural gas. The relationship between the supply of oil and natural gas and the workings of the global financial system is arguably the key issue. No seminars on it. It's about a lot of good things, but who's talking about what does this mean if I can't get a mortgage to get a renewable home, which we talked about before the session. What does it mean when my local zoning doesn't, they've got it wired to not do things. Don has to get propane for his renewable house and he doesn't understand why. It's clear if you think about the financial system. Aaron, school teacher, sent this brilliant statement. He said, as he's out there trying to say, what about this issue? And he's grappling with it and he's sharing his writings. And he said in an email, the hard truth I've been dealing with is money equals energy. More specifically, using money equals consuming energy. It does not matter how the money is used. Using money always consumes energy. They are intimately interlinked. Third observation to be aware of as we talk, because they're going to come up as we talk about these solutions, is we probably all need to go back and do a lesson with Professor Bartlett, who actually spoke at the ASPO conference in Denver that John and I attended. And what he does is he goes around and just teaches people about exponential growth. What happens when you have finite resources? It's science. It's basic science of compounding that works good for our finances, bad for resources with a growing population. Meaning, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about details. But what if this is just a population issue? Population issue, meaning we have a carrying capacity issue of the planet. Everything else, we're like symptomatic treatment. Do this, do that. But the planet just can't support 10 billion. We don't know that it's true. I'm just asking, what if? Think of yeast. You got a bowl of yeast. You take sugar, you throw it in the bowl. Yeast are the humans, sugar's the oil. Yeast will go and replicate, and they do it exponentially, which is why they're a good analogy. They bloom. No more sugar. They go to the peak sugar conferences for answers. Doesn't matter. They slowly will come back to that point where the carrying capacity of that substance equals what's available by dying off. Now, John, we don't show that this is the die-off slide. Don't look if you're a child. We got yelled at because we said there's die-off potential. We don't know if that's going to happen. It scares the kids. Any kids here? Oh, well, the heck with it. We have a population of 1 billion. We go up to 10 billion because of what? This little momentary blip of cheap oil. Maybe the population is only at that number because of cheap energy. The only reason, and something has to give. I said it, John. So, those three observations, just kind of hold them there because we don't know. We just think those are some distinctions that need to be present when John talks. Let's do the Dickens walk through energy. Okay? You know, the energy past, we're going to talk a little bit about that sprinkled in. We're going to talk about our energy present. And then John, and this is his picture, this is what he really looks like. He's like, if I said, would you wear a robe one day? Now, he's going to try to soften it, but just listen underneath his message. He will be bursting many hopes, and that's what we will be looking like at the end. Or we should, if he did his job. And so people ask the question that's asked during the tale, are these the shadows, when we get down to this, of things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be? And so I'm obliged to read, well, of course, if the courses are departed from, the ends will change. Maybe not. There may not be enough time. We may have lost it all 30 years ago. Maybe. We don't know yet. For an easy transition. Okay?
So we needed to listen to the old hippies.
The old hippies maybe had it right, but, you know. So, if you're going to look at energy, you got to look at what are we using? Clearly, I think, John, you showed this in your natural gas talk. We are using oil, maybe a third of oil, quarter of natural gas, a quarter of coal, some nuclear. That 1% total is our renewables, including hydroelectric. So we're using a lot of oil and natural gas. Not so much renewables for those people that think, you know, just be real. Out of the renewable pie, most of it's what, Dom?
Wood.
It's wood.
Photovoltaics.
Hydro. No, very little photovoltaics. I do that to wake them up. Very little solar, wind, alcohol fuels, geothermal. Just recognize we're starting at such a low level that you got to think how to scale this up. If something's going to replace what I'm going to show you is a peaking and a falling off of an energy source. What do we have though? No problem if you have a lot of what you're using. It appears we have a lot of coal. Very little oil, very little natural gas, and a reasonable chunk of uranium. Interesting how we're hearing a lot about nuclear and coal these days. No accident. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on natural gas because natural gas, John spent an hour on, may have, because of its characteristics, it may be more amenable to solar thermal and to other ways of solving that because of its characteristics that oil doesn't have, because it's this rich, dense energy liquid that we use for transportation. People think you're going to solve this peak oil problem by sticking a windmill on your house, are missing a distinction, which is this is maybe more about the mobility of our society, how we get our food. 80 to 95% of all transport on the planet is fueled by oil products, petrochemicals, goods and shops, fertilizers. I mean, oil is everywhere. It's all over our bodies. This stuff is deeply embedded into our civilization. So the question that we ask is, if we have the problem of not enough oil, we're using a lot of it, that's probably where we're going to see the problem emerge first. Then let's look at it. How are we using it? Over what time frame, and what's the future hold? So here's a graph. Oil was discovered, we started using it, a certain number of billion barrels per year. And we started using it exponentially, isn't that nice? Until sometime we got up there, I don't know, 20 plus billion. We had the Israeli-Arab war. The people didn't like our support of it. They actually stopped shipping to us. We were a big part of the use. There was a dip. John's going to tell you, during that dip, what was prices? Quadrupled. That little dip. Then we said, fine, no problem, get back up. Iran. Actually, we had trouble getting the oil because there was a disturbance in that region, and that was a major dip. Prices doubled or tripled again, but we went on our merry way. Until now, we are achieving new heights of extraction. We don't use the word production. We don't produce oil. We're up to, in this chart, it's 27 billion. It might be 29 billion. You're going to find it's not going to really matter on some of these big numbers, the conclusions that we're going to head up to. So the question is, what does the chart look like? We just keep doing it, then it falls off in 100 years. and it drops suddenly. What does the future on this side of the graph look like? Well, it's simple. How much oil is in the ground? Okay, let's just say trillion barrels. That's how much we had. They think that's what we had. Nobody's really arguing that. It even could be 2 trillion. Numbers don't really ultimately change. Let's say a trillion. That's a pretty good number. 27 billion. 27 billion every year. Remember that 1,000 a second? 27 billion. We simply run out in 37 years. All right, lecture over. I was teasing you. There's nothing more to say. We got 37 years to work this out. There's a problem with that. It's a myth. You don't do oil that way. That assumes 2 things. One, demand freezes at 27 billion. China doesn't think they're going to just hold off at the level they are. I don't think we think that. It also assumes that like what did you do, Don, a shake?
Yes, milkshake.
A milkshake that you take oil by just sticking a straw and you suck it out. Until one day, suck, boom, you're down to 0. There's all the oil. There's your time frame. Wrong. Oil actually has to work itself through porous rock, sand, to little caverns. It takes time. There are geological behaviors to get that substance out of the ground that become extremely relevant in pinpointing the time of peak oil. So what we think we have to do is look at an area that already went through this. What area was the #1 producer of oil since it was discovered in 1859 through the 50s and 60s? The Saudi Arabia of the world. I was shocked. I did not know this. And don't be embarrassed not knowing. I know I'm learning stuff on the way here because I'm just, did you know blah blah blah? I'm like, oh my God. They rock my world because there's just data I missed. I didn't know 50s and 60s we were Saudi Arabia. We had the most blessed supply of oil, more than anyone but Saudi Arabia. We have peaked. So the question is, what can we learn from how we peaked? Did anybody get it right? Did somebody predict that one? Sure enough, this man. Thought he looked like John. Maybe this was last time. Hubbard predicted in '56, well in advance, through much scorn and ridicule, that we would peak in '70s. He was scorned, but he got it right. So and this is not just us. Many scientists take the data and say, let's just apply the Hubbard methodology that he did in the U.S., which was simple. You cannot extract what you do not discover. So you simply look at discoveries. How much did we discover? When did we discover all the oil in the U.S.? Looks like in the 30s. Not much else since. You put a time lag because it takes time to get it out. Like I said, you don't just suck it up. It takes time. You draw roughly a bell curve of all things. And when you reach about half of what you've pulled out, you begin to flip over to this sellers versus buyers market and you begin this permanent decline. And those little red marks are actual what occurred against Hubbard's model. And by golly, he nailed it. Now, there's lots of arguments. Can it really apply to the world? And why didn't we see all this damage done to the U.S.? It's called importing. The world can't import from Mars. So they say, let's just go back to Pennsylvania. That's where we found it. We found it 1850s, Pennsylvania, Pennzoil. Sorry, there's no such thing as Pennzoil. It's Venezuela oil. They just keep the brand. It's gone. It ain't in Pennsylvania. Texas, down the off-ramp, 80% of Texas oil is gone. I use prettier graphs now because I want to keep it. Colorado had a lot. It's fundamentally gone. Wyoming, it's gone. So they say, okay, just drill more somewhere else. Michigan. The problem is, we are Swiss cheese. Out of the 4.6 million wells, we've drilled 3.4 million of them here. They think about it. You got a planet. The big oil supplies are going to be found first. They're not finding much. I know you're getting asked to invest in oil wells. I'm going to talk about that. They did. Okay, all right. It's not in the contiguous states. What about that Crude Bay thing? We got that big Alaskan pipeline. That truly was gigantic. Let's go and look at that thing. Let's see if we can get more. Maybe there's more surrounding it. The problem is, and I'll show you a graph, it's 80% gone too. So that whole Alaskan thing that we've been using for 1 in every 10 gallons is pretty much getting near the end of the supply. And they said, yeah, but we found something else, Alpine. You probably haven't heard this because this stuff doesn't make headlines, but we did find an amazingly big well, right? Alpine. Here's the problem. You got to put numbers on these things when you read these articles. Here's Crude Bay. Most of it's been used up. We are going to get the last bits of it. Here's the next biggest discovery that we're all excited about in the last 10 years. Minuscule. So people say, okay, wait a minute. Deep water. Deep water, right? The hurricane, remember something? Oil, deep water? Deep water, that's going to have the oil, so maybe the U.S. has a peak. I will just give you the cut to the chase. 2 squares. Forget it all. Probably. Okay, say I'm wrong by 3. times or double. It's minuscule. The reason they're happy about deep water or excited is it hasn't peaked yet. But there's not much there. Maybe a 1.5 to 2 years supply. It takes 15 years to get it, and it's about to peak. The hope in the deep water is, again, throw some numbers, read the books, you'll see these numbers. So we ask, okay, first of all, people say, yeah, but if you just dug deeper, we're already a couple miles in, or better. This is technology being thrown at the deep water problem. Come on, does that look like they've got some serious thinking? This is a city. Here's what it looks like at night. They're doing everything they can in the deep waters in spite of hurricanes. So I don't think the deep water is going to be the magic thing that's going to take us and say the U.S. was never in peak. So we got one last spot. Where is it? Where should we go? Anwar! I'm going, Don, Anwar, John, let's talk. Rip the numbers open. This must be important. It's taking up 90% of the debate. Like this is... If we got all the oil out of Anwar, which is only 80 miles from where the pipeline's getting the North Slope, that's it. So out of all the oil we'll consume, it would be 3.2 billion barrels. Quick math, we use 27 billion as a planet, roughly. We use 1/4 of it. So let's say 7 billion. What is that? Months? Okay, great. 6 months if we do that. Now, great. We're probably, I hate to tell you, they're probably going to get it because nobody seems to want to look at the numbers in 6 months when you're unemployed and you suddenly need it. That's going to be one of the costs is we're going to get every last drop, mind you. But what people don't realize is it's almost irrelevant. So if this is the pie, this is what was consumed, everybody approximately our age, from the 50s through the 2025. So this is kind of the baby boom, pre-baby boom. This is our grandparents. They use that much. We pretty much use this much. And this is what we're leaving for our kids. I brought my little 2-year-old Charlie and put it on tape. Charlie, I hereby give you that piece of pie. Because we are the oil tribe, 4% of the world's people, 25% of the world's oil. Not a bad thing. We used it. I'm an entrepreneur. We used it to create a wonderful industrial society. If you view that in your value system as great, and become and solve all sorts of medical things, a lot of positive things, how we used our oil. But we do have kind of the American ritual of filling it up. We go to the moon every 20 years. We are not hunter man, farmer man. We're soccer mom or man, soccer dad. We depend on cheap oil to kind of propel our mobile civilization called the United States. It's as if, when you look at all the energy, and I love this one, and I give credit to ASPO and Udall and all the guys that I've stolen the grass from because they said, don't worry, just get the message out. It's as if we have 300 energy slaves working 24 hours a day on our behalf right now at my house. Somebody's keeping the lights and everything going and the stores, and so the food's all ready. It's really amazing. We're richer than the greatest king ever was, as Dan talked about in his talk. So if the U.S. peaked, can we take that model, apply it to the world, and pinpoint a date so we know when no imports are going to save us? We think yes. What do? Look at discoveries. When did we get most of the discoveries worldwide? All the big wells were found in the 60s. We're not finding much at all. That's where you got to go, because that's what we're extracting. So what we do, and by the way, people say, oh, bad numbers. No, ExxonMobil, public numbers, they got to disclose the truth or they go to jail now. This is their projections. Here's what we've discovered, here's what's left. There's not much left. They know it. Read their stuff. Go to the stockholders' reports. You'll see they're not drilling, they're buying up the people that have this stuff. It's interesting if you read what the oil companies are doing. So what do? We take that massive amount, all these little green lines of discovery, and we put a lag time, draw our bell curve. We got to do a little thing to compensate for the fact that we do have supply and demand destruction when we have recessions or turbulence. So we think it's more like it's going to get compressed. So it'll be a flattish top. It'll probably elongate the tail. But at some point, mind you, we will reach that point where it flips to a seller's market and the decline begins and prices escalate and never come back. See, we're used to them coming back. Will they come back? It's possible we have achieved that, and you get it even prior to peak, that those supply forces and demand forces show up in price early. So what are the predictions? We can't predict it, but everybody and their brother that's a petroleum engineer has said, here's some numbers. And we're thinking, who cares if it's 2005, 2010, or even for crying out loud, man, sometimes our government says things and does the calculations and they give outrageously far out numbers. Let's just say it's somewhere in this time frame between now, 10 years, 15, 20 years. That's not a lot of time to reshift an entire planetary civilization. At ASPO in November, we got the latest data. Matt Simmons, who's one of the experts, he's got Bush's ear. He says 2006 to 2008, and here's a general set of numbers. It's all kind of like, what's the graph, John? There it is. It's kind of like, if this is all the oil and this is what we're using, yeah, we're here, we might be here, we might be here. We don't know quite. Who cares? We're kind of right there. Okay, and we're about to go down the slope. John's going to talk about what happens as you go down the slope. Is it going to be a fast slope? What happens to prices? What are the implications? What are we likely to do? What are the impacts to our lifestyles? Here's what I like to do is show it with history. We were blessed with this oil, millions of years, special conditions. There it was. Money was found in the basement. Instead of investing it like you would tell any nephew that inherits money, we just spent it on a party. Not bad. Remember, we built something wonderful. However, we've got an issue here as we reach peak that could change things in how we treat the last remaining amounts of that and what we do for the future. So, one last point I want to make before we bring up some questions that we talk to John is, how come we're not, I mean, yeah, all this is happening, but prices went up, but it was kind of hurricane driven, and man, it was $10 in '99, and you know, population grew from '99 till now by 400 million. An entire North America's had a population. I didn't see all this cataclysmic stuff, so what's going on? Well, the oil is pretty much, I'm going to show you in some area of the world, but we got friends in what we call the rest of the world, that we say, keep giving it, and they're doing it. They're extracting it very fast for us. This is where we're getting it all through. We're taking our friends and saying, please, we need this oil to run our civilization, and they're giving it to us. Is this good? Our friends are going to dry first. It's going to leave the oil, 75% of the world's oil, because our friends are being our friends, in the hands of people that may not necessarily be our greatest allies, but they also know this is fleeting. This quote just got me. My father rode a camel, I drive a car. My son flies an airplane, his son will ride a camel. They also know, everyone knows, this is not rocket scientist, what is about to occur when you spend an inheritance. And what we're finding is that this issue of spare capacity, if in fact what we're hearing is, don't worry, we got to deal with the Saudis, they'll come up with spare capacity. They'll get us, if we have to, they'll turn that spigot on and pump out another, what, 500,000 to 1 million a day? A day more, as we need it. And by the way, they've done it. We've got a deal. We keep you in power, our military kind of supports them. You make sure if 911, because 9/11, they helped out. They pumped it. There were lots of people helped out. We did not get through these crises. But it doesn't, they're not pumping more. What's happened? They say, oh, we got enough, we can go up to this, that number, but it's not happening. Look at the numbers. Maybe they're getting close to not being able to do it, and they just, nobody wants to kind of say that, send that message, because it could cause, well, you say it, first thing is prices will triple just on somebody saying it. So the question is, are we sleepwalking to disaster? Don Hodel, former energy secretary, said, we're sleepwalking to disaster. When it happens, journalists are going to shout, we're running out of oil. If you remember anything from this session, say, because somebody's going to tell you, I hear you're running out of oil, I hear we got lots. We do. Remember? 1 trillion barrels possibly, equal to what we've already used. Doesn't matter. It's the cheap oil that's going to count. It's the grease of our financial systems and our growth-based civilization. After production peaks, oil will be readily available at higher prices through declining amounts for 50 years. No one will freeze or be in the dark in America. America's reserves of natural gas and oil should last 50 years and 100 years. John's questioning some of these assumptions, but let's just give it to him. But the transition to the expensive oil may be bumpy. John is going to talk about the bumps of the transition. Others have called this the long emergency, meaning it's a crisis that may look not like a catastrophic doom collapse, but how about a series of recessions like the 70s that go on for 50 years? Don't know if that's true, right? I'm an alarmist. What are you doing? But what if it just looks kind of just different than all the different ways, and it's not about going out to farms. John's going to talk about this. We're going to throw it up and then hopefully get some discussion. Because I got to make sure we don't, because I just set the stage. I didn't say anything bad. I just asked questions. But I heard that we can't stand too much reality. So I just want you to know, the only thing I was talking about was in the Milky Way of 100 billion stars was one planet next to one star. There's 100 million galaxies. There's plenty of energy in the universe. It's just our planet may have a problem with the inhabitants on it and how we've fueled our civilization. Keep that in context, because I talk to people and they go, I can prove we'll never run out. Well, they're right. Gosh, there's energy. But it may not help us during this transition. Someday we will probably get to it, and in a couple hundred years this won't matter. But it will matter to the people sitting in this room, and most importantly, to your children. So, with that, I'm going to bring up John, and then we'll do some questions as we segue. This is John Richter, the man I met at 13 years old reading energy books. We make no money on this. He just feels that he's got some data. Anybody can speak about it. I speak about it, but I only speak standing on the shoulders of Johns and Doms and Matt Simmons and Udalls, because they actually say I can prove it, because you're going to see a lot of people stand up and say other things, and where they'll fail is the data and the proof, the science, the economics. Challenge us. We could have it wrong. All the scientists could have it wrong. With that, the energy prophet, who doesn't look like the Grim Reaper, John Richter.